Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Managing QAD Access Security. As I transition us to the featured presentation, here is just a little bit about Don Lindsey.
Good morning. Hope you're having a great 2023 so far. So glad you could join Christian and myself this morning for a quick discussion on security. We talked last session about schemas and the way to represent knowledge in QAD. Today we'd like to take and talk about something that has been in the news of lately, data security. As your company grows and changes, maintaining security at all levels of the organization is becoming more and more critical. Neglecting your data security can cause irreparable harm to the organization's reputation, bottom line, even lead to hefty financial penalties for potentially non-SOX compliance. To remain SOX compliant, you must manage access rights during onboarding, role changing, and offboarding. Manufacturing companies nowadays are dealing with ever-tightening security at all levels of the organization. QAD user companies have to implement security restrictions to their user base and comply with SOX and segregation of duty guidelines. IT teams who have to deal with multiple manufacturing and distribution centers with multiple levels of sites, locations, can get bogged down just doing maintenance. According to Zippa.com, the average number of administrative actions for onboarding can be as high as 41 different processes. Controlling this is a challenge. As always, there are many terms and definitions that are associated with a subject like security that we should become familiar with. Remember, if you don't know the meaning of a term or a phrase I use, please look it up on Google or the knowledge base on the QAD website, or send us an email at 32soft. As with past webinars, we will have a URL page on the 32soft website that can help you navigate this subject matter of security. Here are just a few of the things we'd like to cover today. First, we'd like to introduce some general concepts around the use of security. That includes SOX, audit trails, segregation of duties, roles, responsibilities, and then cover a utility for security in complex site implementations. As we previously pointed out, no one calling themselves a professional investigates this subject unless they also investigate the history of that functionality and the individual contributors to that taxonomy. Individuals who have contributed to computer security include Bob Thomas, who wrote the first computer virus. We all remember John McAfee. There was an interesting fellow. And John von Neumann, who wrote The Theory of Self-Reproducing Automata, one of the first books on computer viruses. The ARPANET was the first wide area packaged switched network with distribution controls. It was also one of the first networks to implement the TCP/IP protocol suite. So many ways to compromise security. Since we'll be speaking primarily about computer security today, it's interesting to note that computer crime was only first defined in a formal process with the publication of the Trusted Computer System Validation Criteria in just 2005. This covered such areas as policy, accountability, documentation, discretionary, mandatory, and verified protections. Think Mr. Trump, Mr. Biden, and Mr. Pence. In the early 2002s, there were several financial scandals involving felonious accounting practices, which rocked Wall Street in the financial industry. WorldCom, the second largest telephone company in the time, was caught cheating. Tyco International officers Dennis Kowalski and Mark Schultz stole almost $600 million from investors, and ultimately Kenneth Lay and Jeff Skeeling of Enron displayed their skills in the best movie I've seen on the subject, Enron, the smartest guys in the room. To combat these legendary crimes, Senator Paul Sarbanes and Representative Mike Oxley co-sponsored the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, otherwise known as SOX. SOX is the United States federal law that mandates certain practices in financial record keeping and reporting for corporations. It was passed in 2002 and was intended to guard against fraud and theft. There are 6 primary sections of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that address disclosure controls, improper influence of conduct of audits, disclosures in periodic reports, internal controls, criminal penalties, and civil actions. Internal control policies and procedures are put in place by organizations to ensure continued reliability of accounting systems. Accuracy and reliability are paramount in the accounting world. Without accurate records, managers can't make fully informed decisions, and financial reports can contain errors. There are 7 categories of internal control. The first of these controls is referred to as the separation of duties. This involves splitting responsibilities for bookkeeping, deposits, reporting, auditing among various individuals. The further duties are separated, the less chance a single employee has of committing fraudulent acts. Controlling access to different parts of the accounting system via passwords, lockouts, and electronic access logs can keep unauthorized users out of the system. Robust tracking can also serve to deter attempts at fraudulent access in the first place. Physical audits include hand counting cash and any physical assets tracked in the accounting system, such as inventory, materials, and tools. Standardizing documents for financial transactions, such as invoices, internal material requests, inventory receipts, and travel expense reports, can help maintain consistency in record keeping over time. Using a double entry accounting system to calculate trial balances on a daily or weekly basis adds reliability by ensuring that the books are always balanced. Occasional accounting reconciliations can ensure that balances in your accounting system match up with balance in the accounts held by other entities, including banks, suppliers, and credit customers. Requiring specific managers to authorize certain types of transactions can add a layer of responsibility to accounting records by providing that transactions have been seen, analyzed, and approved by appropriate authorities. IT policies and procedures should be in place and the documents well controlled in the areas of security, program development, change management, and computer operations. These policies and procedures should be reviewed and updated by IT management on an annual basis as part of a SOX audit. Computer security, cybersecurity, and information technology security is the protection of computer systems and networks from attack by malicious actors that may result in unauthorized information disclosure, theft of, damage to hardware, software, or data, as well as disruptions or misdirections. The professional certification for this process is the CISSP, Certified Information Systems Security Professional. Just as CPIM is recognized certification for the supply chain, as of January 2022, there were 152,000 individuals holding the CISSP certification worldwide. Or QAD 36.3.24 sets the basic parameters for security data in your system and includes such elements as idle time, timeout, display dates, maximum access failures, enable reason types. All must be examined and controlled at least yearly, according to Sarbanes-Oxley. You can use 36.3.13.8 site security maintenance to specify user IDs or rules that can be updated and associated with a specific site in QAD. In QAD, you can take security all the way down to the field level in most maintenance programs. This is a very effective control mechanism for access to data. However, it is extremely maintenance intensive. We will cover a little later in our discussion about mass update capabilities. The bottom line in security is the individual. The definition of users in QAD is defined in 36.3.1, user maintenance. We will not have time to cover all of the fields and impacts of each on the system. Needless to say, you should read the user guide for QAD security and controls for your version of QAD. Use 3.3.3 user password maintenance to update your system password, as well as to view information associated with your user ID. With the 36.3.7 update restrictions menu, you can additionally enforce security rules by rules for transfers of purchase orders, sales orders, distribution orders, and some service and support functionality. 36.3.4 User Domain Entity Access Maintenance defines user access privileges for domains and entities. Before implementing any security model, you should develop a detailed security plan that describes how users and roles will be utilized within your system to satisfy the business requirements of your organization. It is important to understand how users relate to roles and how roles relate to menus via the permissions to membership to properly structure the SOD. Use 36.3.6.1 create roles to define roles in your system. You should define as many roles as required in order to model your business processes in the system. Remember, a role is a logical subset of activities that describes a user's business functions or a set of responsibilities within the business environment. 36.3.6.5 Roles Permissions assigns QAD menus to a role. You can also assign other QAD programs, not on menus, to roles. Role-based access control limits users to executing only the system menus item belonging to the groups they are assigned to. 36.3.6.6 Role membership maintenance defines the association between a role defined in the system and a system user to indicate which role is the user's default role. Remember, the default role does not affect security, but is used to determine role-specific customizations and stored searches. Segregation of duties is one of the primary tools for internal control. Segregation of duty requires you separate individuals from any potential risk associated with activities within the security setup. A common segregation of duties for an AP clerk is not to be responsible for the accounting portion of AP and be responsible for signing checks. Auditors are concerned that segregation of duty categories and roles are appropriately assigned and any conflicts defined in the SOD matrix. That segregation of duty policy exceptions are appropriately documented, that non-system mitigating controls are sufficient to overcome system policy exceptions, and that there also needs to be user provisioning for onboarding of resources to ERP and other systems, offboard resources when the employee leaves the company, and evidence exists with business approvals for access. Segregation of duties needs to be established throughout the organization, test, development, and production environments. Parameters should include that testing is not done by the programmer and administrators are independent of developers, and there should be elevated access for network processes like ERP, 401k, and payroll. There are 5 main functions needed in the QAD SOD configuration: roles permissions, roles membership, the role exclusion from SOD, SOD policy exceptions, and the ability to import, export, and set the system configuration. There are four primary components of QAD's SOD, and these include the SOD categories, SOD matrix. This is the relationship of the SOD categories to other SOD categories and defines conflicted categories, policy exceptions, and role exclusions that do not require conflict management. SOD is very flexible, but requires much thought in planning. The setup of segregation of duties process flow starts with activation and configuration of SOD. You then create SOD categories, assign categories to functions, define category compatibility, set up security, define role exclusions, review violations, the SOD logs, and resolve rule violations. Then you define the policy exceptions. Use SOD configuration to activate SOD rule checking in your system. When you first begin to implement, it is recommended that you deactivate SOD rule checking and only activate it after you have defined all the categories, SOD matrix, linked resources, SOD categories, and defined roles. If you deactivate SOD, the system does not check for role and role permission violations, and notifications and loggings are also disabled. Once you've defined the process and the definitions, then activate the SOD process. Use 36.3.27.1.1 SOD category create to create as many categories as required to accommodate your specific SOD requirements. Remember, SOD categories are used to group business activities that share similar characteristics within the organization. After defining your SOD categories, you can use 36.3.27.3 SOD matrix to specify which category codes are compatible with each other. You can also use 36.3.27.1.5 SOD category Excel integration to help in defining the process. Use 36.3.27.4 SOD category membership maintained to maintain the association between the application resource, that is an activity or a program represented by a menu item, and the SOD category. Use SOD policy exception to create policy exceptions in your SOD functionality. Defining a policy exception gives a specific user access to a pair of resources that are not compatible under SOD policy. Use role exclusion to indicate that a particular role is exempt from SOD rule checks and blocking. SOD role exclusion is the highest level of SOD policy exception and should be used carefully. The first thing the auditors are going to ask you for is a report on the violations that have occurred in the SOD functionality. Use the 36.3.27.9 SOD violations report to make the auditors happy. SOD is a complicated process of analysis and due diligence in the preparation of the data. Most of this can take place outside of QAD, then loaded into QAD to execute the controls. The Code of Federal Regulations, 21 CFR Part 11, mandates that users be held accountable for their actions. Users must not be able to reasonably deny the responsibility for actions taken attributable to their logon account. Electronic signatures are a way to capture approvals electronically and validate that the approval was granted. We won't spend a lot of time on electronic signatures today as it's a complex subject. However, we will be addressing e-signatures in a later webinar. An audit trail is the process of evaluating an organization's practices for safeguarding electronic information from loss, damage, unintended disclosure, or denial of availability. A typical audit trail record includes information that helps you identify who made the change which program made the change, when the change was made, and what the change was. As with any QAD functionality, audit trails require a fair amount of setup. From the definition of policies to the configuring of the databases to indicating which fields in the tables are part of that audit process. First step in the audit trail setup is to define the audit databases that will going to be used to house the audit trail data. Use 36.12.13.11 audit DB maintenance to create and maintain the connection parameters for these archival databases. 36.12.13.5 audit configuration maintenance enables auditing unselected tables. The selection of tables that need to be traceable is critical, as this defines your audit process. As the selection of the tables, there are some recommended populations, but it is entirely up to your organization and your relationship with your audit company and their interpretation of your SOX requirements. As we spoke last month, with regards to entity relationship diagrams, these should be used to define the fields in which your tables define your requirements for the needed traceability. With the use of the entity diagrams, next define which fields in each table need to be traced. Caution the selection of fields, as you should consider if it will be changed, will it be reviewed, and the size of the data in the table of the audit database itself. Here are some helpful documents for setting up audit trails. Now that we've looked at several aspects of security in QAD, including users, roles, segregation of duty, audit trails, we recognize that maintenance of these fields and processes are critical to the adherence to SOX requirements. But these require an extensive amount of maintenance to systems, especially in domain and location-intensive environments with many users. It can be overwhelming for finance and IT organizations to deal with. Let's look at a tool that might assist in the maintenance of this vast amount of data required for security. So how do you manage all this without losing your mind? 32Soft has designed a web application, the QAD User Security Management System, QUS, that makes quick work of the processes involved in keeping your data access secure. The QUS system is a single place where IT staff can manage all QAD user security requests across multiple production and tests environments. This application is primarily for IT personnel and auditors, along with functional approvers, plant managers, and segregation of duty administrators. This application is not intended for normal users. However, they will be included in the notification process. Some of the features of the QUS system include a validatable approval flow, user requests and access, manager, functional, SOD, extra, and plant level approval. It checks for SOD conflicts and is automatically implemented across multiple environments. The QAD User Security, QUS, can both initiate new user requests and forward that automatically to management. So the approval process can be used to view, modify, and execute the QUS functionality. The flow is to create the user request, then route to manager, and is automatically routed to the site functional approvers. Manager and site functional approvers approve the request. It is determined if SOD is required. The request is forwarded to the SOD manager. The SOD manager approves, determines if SOD exception is needed. If the SOD manager routes it then to the plant manager. Plant manager approves, determines if extras are required. It's routed to the extra approver. The extra approves it. It's ready to implement, And lastly, it is implemented. In the course of processing the QUS system, functionality is inevitable that issues will arise when dealing with dozens to hundreds of users, dozens of individual sites within multiple domain environments. QUS has the tools to allow for correct modification of a request and the re-implementation of requests through a system of automatically generated emails and documents. There are several steps involved in such a significant and multifaceted function as QAD User Security. QUS firstly requires a definition of sites and their connections, for which there are several setup options which need to be determined. The users of the app need to be defined, their roles. If there are any security issues with those roles, you may need to define segregation of duty rules, along with categories, etc. As we see with most all things in QAD application module functions, normally these start with the control file. Here we see 9924 and the elements of the system that define time cutouts, departments, approval emails, documents, domains, and servers. Sites in QUS are not restricted to those defined in the familiar 1.1.13 site maintenance in QAD. In fact, they can be totally different, like TRMD might have site 10 and site 20 underneath it. All depends on how you structure it. The site elements are site, domain, type, description, server, port, and active. The QAD User Security function defines users through maintenance for who has and how a user will interface and be recognized by the application. QUS defines how users are going to be processed through the security system. This is determined primarily by role functionality, that is, what groups of individuals or functions are defined for your organization's security schemas. Roles are defined by user ID, role, for, active, user modify, and date. Again, consider SOX reporting requirements. In role maintenance, alternates can be defined for someone who might be on vacation or for other circumstances. Security groups determine the flow of the QAD User Security functionality. QUS exception maintenance defines how rules are manipulated by the functions of approval, emails, SOD, extra, and plant management, and the process distribution. Exception definition requires significant understanding and a detailed review to ensure SOX compliance and audit reporting requirements. If the organization does not have the standard QAD SOD functionality installed, the QUS system will allow for requirement statements for that segregation of duties as required for compliance, as might be exhibited below. Let's walk through just a short version of a typical QUS request flow. Firstly, the user signs into the system and enters their password. Here is the main screen of QUS. This will need some practice, but modifiable by the organization's requirements. Selection can be defined by request range and/or request date in addition to status. You can also export to Excel. As we saw from the process flows, you can create a request or add a new user. If you add a new user, the following is required: the name, beware of the schema, use Active Directory user ID to initiate the request, choose a type and remarks. The badge number will become the QAD ID, and an email for communication. For each request, by site, type of database, domain, and new request, you will need to define security groups required for the request, types, and selections, either all or specific. You can also create a like user for a copy. You can modify selections for default domain, SOD conflict, extra approval, and status. Save does some validation functions. If there is an error, it is highlighted in red, and you can edit to correct according to your rules. If the system detects an SOD occurrence, SOD is displayed in orange highlight. The first step is that the system sends an email automatically to the requester's manager, as in, please approve this request. System provides all request information and an online approval link. From the URL link, the manager signs into the system with his password. The request shows at Manager 1 and Accounting Functional Approval, which are added by the roles and the rules. The manager can approve or deny the request. A denial is routed back to the requester. The manager completes appropriate notes and reasons for documentation, aka SOX. Quick and easy. Notice, no previous comments available, as this is the first line of approval. The at value now shows at the Site Functional Approver location. Once the manager has approved, he is removed from the list of approvals pending. Only the Site Functional Approver is now requested as shown. An email is sent to the Site Functional Approver based on the listed rules. The Site Functional Approver logs into the system automatically with his or her password. The Site Functional Approver can approve or deny the request. Previous approver notes are visible. Site Functional Approver indicates the reasons for approval. The system then informs the user that the request is successfully approved. The request view now shows at has changed to SOD1 based on the rules and the roles. If there is an SOD review required, an email is automatically sent to the SOD reviewer with a URL link and request information. A click on the URL in the email takes the SOD user to the required logon. Data is automatically populated, only the password is required. As SOD1, Segregation of Duty Administrator, cannot approve in this scenario, SOD1 can either edit the request for SOD parameters and/or, if required, forward to the plant manager. When the SOD administrator eliminates the conflict in SOD, now the user can approve or deny. Now the request has moved to extra based on the rules and the roles. Here is the email to the extra approver. If rules demand that multiple sites be notified, both site and functional approvers will deny or approve requests. The system will correctly process and email all participants. If an extra approver is required for a defined group, the system will automatically route for the approval to the extra in conjunction with the SOD approval process. At this step, the QAD ID has been generated but not yet created because the request has not been completely approved. With the SOD and/or extra and/or plant manager approves, they can all see previous requests notes and will input appropriate reasons and either approve or deny request. Request now shows at a blank location with the status as both extra approved and plant approved. Therefore, it is ready for implementation. Now that the request is fully approved, the request can be implemented. An implementation job for the application runs in batch or can be executed manually. The job goes into all sites and runs implementation routines based on the batch files defined for updates. The implementation routine is updated. The system automatically submits an approval notification email to the user, indicating the new user ID and additional security-related process information. There are three primary sets of data automatically provided by the system at implementation. That is the email we just looked at to the user, a QAD implementation log, and the detail of the request ID. Once any issue is fixed, the request can be re-implemented. The process flow checks and ensures system integrity. When complete, the status is changed to re-implement. 32Soft has designed a web application, the QAD User Security Management System, QUS, that makes quick work of the processes involved in keeping your data access secure. The QUS system is a single place where IT staff can manage all QAD user system requests across multiple production tests and other environments. So what have we covered today? Well, we've talked about SOX, about security, user definitions, roles, permissions, memberships, audit trails, segregation of duty, And finally, the QUS system. Again, I would recommend the following to increase your skills in supply chain security. There are the QAD forums, the West Coast user group, and the Midwest user group have excellent discussion and resource boards. There is the QAD knowledge base, the QAD document library, and the QAD Learning Center. As I mentioned before, here's a list of the URLs complete with clickable links for all the slides, documents, records, and sites that were used for this presentation. Just click the URL link on the 32 website and you are brought to a list of URLs for various subjects regarding security that you can use to help you better understand the use of your ERP system. Just a word about 32Soft data loaders. Once you've learned all there is to learn about the supply chain in QAD, you will come to the same conclusion I have, that ERP systems require a huge amount of data to be useful and accurate. 32Soft offers many, too many to list here, data loaders and applications that can assist you around most QAD functionality. From production planner to sales order to QUS, 32Soft data loaders use a familiar Excel format, which makes it easy to get data in and out of QAD. There's a 60-day complimentary trial period with simple implementation. Christian, Andreas, and Olina are always there to help. The 32Soft loaders work with all versions of QAD from SE to the latest EE and AUX. Please contact Denise, Alex, or myself if you are interested. We hope you've enjoyed this quick overview of QAD security functionality and how one might use the QAD user security functions to help deal with electronic update and required tables via emails and table definitions in QAD. Your ability to control security and provide required audit trails is critical in today's electronic environment on the internet. Users expect security to be properly handled by IT, and proper understanding and setup of security is responsible of IT management, operations, and finance. Please contact myself, Denise, or Alex if you think of any questions regarding security in QAD after the webinar has closed, and we'll be glad to get back to you as soon as possible.
Thank you, Don. That was lots of information, fabulous information as always. Up next, we have our March webinar, and we will be joined by colleagues from Yamaha. They will share some of their challenges and how they improved both efficiency and productivity. That will be another really good one we hope you can make next month. And then the following week is the QAD Midwest User Group Conference, as Don mentioned. Don will be presenting, of course, and if you are attending, please be sure to swing by our booth and at least say hello. And then bringing us back to today, Don's review of permissions associated with roles and rules and their critical association with access security, because security is a process, not a product. So clearly it's not something we can simply set and forget or implement and move on. Don, Christian, do either of you have anything else for today?
This is a subject that is current and is going to be expanded over the next few years immensely. So need to pay attention to it and take great care.
Yes, as always, thank you all very much for taking out time today to join us. And a big thank you to you both, Don and Christian, for your time and expertise. We hope to see everybody again next month. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.